When I played A Charlie Brown Christmas in my piano lessons as a kid, I discovered all of these fancy chords that I had never heard before, like this one. That's an E flat 9 chord with a sharp 11, and it resolves here. And I kept hearing sounds like these all throughout the tune. It happens again here, and here, and even here. This song is called O Tannenbaum. You might know it as O Christmas Tree, and it's an arrangement that was written and performed by Vince Guaraldi and his trio for the 1965 TV special A Charlie Brown Christmas. Once the sound of these chords came in through my ears, they rattled around inside of my empty skull, just taunting me until I figured out how they worked. And in this video, I'm going to show you the reharmonization, the chord substitutions, the harmonic movements that I discovered from this magnificent Vince Guaraldi tune. At first, I was so focused on reading the notes and the rhythms, making sure that my fingers pressed down the right keys at the right time, but I wasn't really listening to what I played. It wasn't until a few days later when I could play through it a bit more fluently that my ears perked up. Ooh, what is that chord? I played it again, and again, and again. I was slowly savoring every note. This chord was magical, so wonderfully complex, so full of tension, but also so satisfying. I just couldn't stop. I kept playing it over and over again. I was trying to understand why this chord felt so good. I could just sit and listen to this chord all day. And yet, I can't, because it torments me. I soon realized that this chord has all this tension in it that needs to be released. This C7 chord pulled me somewhere. It wanted to move to another chord. And when I looked at the music to see what was next, that C7 chord moves to F major. And so I tried playing it. First the fancy C7 chord, and then to F. C7, and then F. And as I repeated this, I started to hear beyond just the two chords. I started to hear that there was a movement between them, that these two chords worked together. You probably predicted that, but that's because you're smarter than I was at 12 years old. You're smarter than I am now. But I looked at the construction of that chord. From the bottom up, it had the root, the 7th. Then it had the flat 2, the 3, and the 6. I'm a bit smarter now than I was back then, so I know that flat 2 is actually flat 9, and that 6 is actually 13. I knew that this 5-1 movement was something that I had been hearing in other music I was playing. I was playing a lot of church hymns and stuff. And so I wondered if I could copy and paste this fancy 5 chord into one of those hymns, and what would happen if I did that. And my whole world exploded. I loved the sound of this chord so much that I started using it every single time that I saw a 5 chord. Now let's stop for a minute and think about this. This was a profound moment for me. I've experienced moments like this over and over in my journey to play jazz. I didn't learn about this technique from a theory book. My teacher didn't explain it to me. It came from me sitting at the piano and playing, listening back to my own playing, and getting excited by what I heard. I got so excited that I had to deconstruct it. I had to play with it in different contexts. I had to transpose it to other keys. All of this exploration came from just one chord in one song. I was over the moon excited for this, and so I wanted to dive back into the sheet music to see what else I could learn from it. I was on the hunt especially for more fancy chords, and so the next thing I did was I compared this Vince Guaraldi version with a traditional version of the same song. When I looked at these side by side, I noticed something right away. The two versions of this song have different chords, but more than that, Vince's version has quite a few more chords than the traditional does. The harmonic changes in Vince's version move more quickly. Listen for yourself, the traditional harmony sounds like this. This basic version is just 1 and 5 chords. Boring! But Vince Guaraldi's version changes it up quite a bit. And as a kid, I was so confused and overwhelmed by all of it. But I was also, at the same time, so motivated to figure it out. And so I decided to go slow, to take my time, to really understand each of the changes. And from that, I saw the logic behind Vince's choices. And so at least some of these things started to make sense to me. I noticed that the traditional version of the song held the one chord for a long time, but that Vince had changed chords more often by walking up the scale. He started with the F, then up to a G, then up to an A. I thought that was pretty cool. It adds some simple movement with other chords that are already and natively a part of the key of F. But then there's this D7 chord, which at first made no sense to me. The original chord was an F major chord, but Vince's D7 chord sounds completely different. The D7 chord doesn't even have an F in it. It has this F sharp instead. But then as I looked at it closer, I noticed something that made me rethink its purpose. What I realized was that this D7 chord had an E flat in it. In hindsight, that didn't really matter at all, but I recognized that E flat as the flat 2 of the D chord, and it was the same pattern that I had seen in that C7 chord from earlier. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was really close, and so I wondered if Vince was thinking about this D7 chord the same way he had been thinking about that C7 chord from before. And if I was right about that, the tension from this D7 chord, and it had a lot of tension, it would have to resolve, right? It would resolve down a fifth, just like the C7 chord had. And indeed, when I looked at the sheet music, that's exactly what it does. We go down from D7 to G. All of this time, I thought that I could only use this voicing if I was playing a 5 chord. But what this shows me is that I could actually use it anytime I wanted to go down by 5 notes, even if it doesn't land on the 1 chord. Here it was clear as day, D7 chord going down to G, which was the 2 chord in the key of F. When we compare Vince's arrangement with the traditional version again, you'll notice that the D7 chord does not even exist in the traditional harmony. At the point where this D7 chord is added, there's nothing in the original. So Vince Guaraldi just wanted to add some extra movement. He wanted to create tension specifically so that he could resolve it. And so he's inserted an entirely original chord into the middle of the song. And so I took this idea and ran with it. Could I add it to other songs too? There's a moment in Amazing Grace where we move from C to A minor. And I wondered what would happen if I stuck one of these 7th chords in the middle of it. So I counted up the scale starting from A, up 5 notes. That gives me E, and I tried it. "12-year-old me would have never considered playing an E7 in the key of C, but it sounds so good as a way to get to A minor. You can only imagine how blown away my 12-year-old brain was at this point. I was more excited to learn these chords than I was to go try and find a girlfriend at the ice rink on Friday night date skate. And so I was on the hunt, not for a girlfriend, for dominant chords. I went back through the arrangement and I spotted this gem. My mind was about to be blown again. What a sound. It's another dominant chord, but this one has a completely different formula. This time it's an E flat 7 chord, but it has an A natural in it. That's the sharp 11. And if you look at this more closely, it's kind of like a Franken chord. My left hand is playing the notes from E7, but my right hand is playing an F major triad. It's like 2 chords at the same time. I want you to remember this for later. This is super important for the end of our story. F major superimposed over the top of E flat 7. At this point, I was growing confident in what was about to happen. These dominant chords, right, like they exist to create tension, and that tension needs to be resolved. And how do we resolve that tension? Well, we go down a fifth. So this E flat 7 chord, it's 5 notes above A flat. So the A flat should be able to resolve it nicely. And so I looked at the sheet music to confirm this, and I found a surprise. It doesn't go to A flat, it goes to D. Could this be right? Is this a mistake? I thought these dominant 7th chords always resolve down a fifth. But here, we're only resolving down a half step. So I decided to try an experiment. I went through different keys and different songs to see if this was just a fluke or if this was a real technique that I should learn. And indeed, It worked great every single time. Now, later on in life, as I became more mature and I learned a whole lot more about music, I learned that this was called the tritone substitution. There's a whole video about that here on this channel. I'll link to that at the end. And over time, I have codified this method that I discovered as a kid. I'm always listening and taking notes of interesting musical ideas that I hear in my favorite recording. Then I sit down at the piano and I deconstruct them. I experiment with them. I turn them into exercises to master that idea in all the keys. And then finally, they just kind of show up naturally in my playing. This process is the whole concept behind my Jazz Fundamentals course, which has over 70 video lessons which walk you through these kind of fundamental techniques like this. On top of that, we meet as a group every week on Zoom to learn something new, and it gives you a chance to get some feedback from me on your playing. For the holidays, I've put this course on sale for 40% off, so down in the description is a link where you can buy it today, or you could send that link to a loved one who knows that you love jazz and just doesn't know what kind of gift to buy you this year. I absolutely love the way that Guaraldi ends this song. Remember that fancy Franken chord thing that I showed you earlier, that E flat 7 chord that had the F major superimposed on top of it? To put that more simply, what our left hand is doing is playing any major or dominant chord, and then our right hand is playing a major triad that's a whole step above it. Let's do that here in F major. Our left hand plays the notes of an F major chord, and our right hand plays the chord up a whole step. That's a G major triad on top of it. And this is exactly what Vince plays at the end. He lands on the 1 chord, F major, but his right hand is playing G major in a big arpeggio. And for the cherry on top, he plays a quote from Jingle Bells, not on the F chord, but instead using the notes of G major.